This is Tuesday, March 12th, 2020, and I'm doing going through this book, Pascal Boyer's Religion Explained, The Evolutionary Origins of Religious Thought. We're in Chapter 3. We're starting Chapter 3, which is the title of which is The Kind of Mind It Takes. And the first part of this chapter is really kind of a storytelling thing. First, he goes to Pride and Prejudice of Jane Austen. When we go to Pemberley with Elizabeth and her family, and they see this great estate. And what he reminds us of is that there's an upstairs and a downstairs, that the downstairs work is largely invisible to the upstairs, especially if you're a guest. She's admiring this great state of Darcy's and kind of overwhelmed with it, actually. And she, Elizabeth, has only a small inkling of how much work it is to make this all work together. Nevertheless, just hear a little bit of a little summary of the downstairs people who make it work. And a house steward, housekeeper, groom of the chambers, butler, valet, lady's maid, chef, footman, under butler, young lady's maid, housemaid, stillman maid, scullery maid, kitchen maid, laundry maid, dairy maid, coachman, groom, postilion, candleman, oddman, steward's room man, and servants' hall boys. And that's just a partial list of the and these are highly specialized. In a great estate like this, there are all kinds of different people. At one point, Darcy meets with the men of the group, and there's a servant there that helps them with the possibility of fishing. And they reference Isaac Watts at the time, who wrote hymns. There is a Isaac Watt hymn in the hymnal, but there's also he was a great one for the spirituality of fishing, and wrote a book about that as well, which is also referenced. Anyway, the point is that the state is complex, and a lot of stuff goes on unnoticed, almost invisible, really. Anyway, so from a guest point of view, none of it is seen. It just all happens out of one's range of knowing. These were highly stylized roles that these people had, and they didn't dare do others unless you were in a small estate where you had to do duplicate things. But in a large estate, each had their specialized duty, and all for making the estate run properly. So he says here, having a complex brain is like being a guest at Pemberley. We enjoy the many advantages of that efficient organization, but we have no real knowledge of what happens downstairs, or how many different systems are involved in making a mental life happen. Okay, so the organization of mental systems is in fact far more complex than anything you would find in even an extravagant household. What makes the system work smoothly is the exquisite coordination of specialized systems, each of which handles only a fragment of the information with which it is constantly bombarded. So the brain is just using little pieces of it all over the brain in different places, highly specialized. Distinctions are constantly produced by the mind. We do not have to think about them. They are unconscious, below our awareness. Now, I'm going to read a story because this is the only way to do this section, really, and give it the helpful thing that it needs to do. So listen to the story. In a quiet and prosperous suburb, a dapper old gentleman with a hat comes out of the back door of a house and walks across the lawn. He is carrying a big screwdriver and a crowbar, which he puts in his trouser side pocket. He looks around a few times and then proceeds along the pavement. Not far from there, a child is playing with a huge Labrador on a leash. All of a sudden, the dog starts at the sight of a cat in the next garden and gives a sudden pull that makes the leash snap out of the child's hands. The dog dashes after its prey, charges across the pavement, and knocks over the old man, who trips and falls flat on his face, his hat rolling in the gutter. The man yells in pain as the screwdriver has sprung out of his pocket and badly cut his arm. The man picks himself up and limps away, massaging his bloody hand, leaving his hat in the gutter. You are not the only witness to all of this. A police officer was patrolling the neighborhood. She picks up the hat and runs after the gentleman, puts a hand on his shoulder and says, "Hey, wait." And the man turns and recoils at the visible shock at the sight of the police officer, looks around as if trying to find an escape route, and finally says, all right, it's fair, cop." From the pockets, he extracts a handful of rings and necklaces and hands them over to the bemused police officer. Okay. Now, this is not great literature. This is simply a story to elicit a lot of different parts of this that are needed in the brain to decode all of this. What he says is there's a whole confederacy of different systems that are involved in handling particular aspects of the scene. And in particular, he's going to illuminate 6 of them. 6, maybe 7. Whatever, 6. Okay, first, understanding the physics of solid objects. The dog yanked the leash out of the child's hand and knocked over the passerby. The link between the leash and the dog's collar is stronger than the child's grip on the leash, and the man is knocked aside because both he and the dog are solid objects that collide when the trajectories cross. This kind of phenomenon is automatically represented in our minds by a set of mechanisms that do what psychologists call intuitive physics, in analogy with scientific physics. Second, understanding physical causation. In the scene you witnessed, you saw the dog hit the man in its way, and you then saw the man stumble and fall down. But that is not the way you would describe it. What seems to you to have happened is that the man tripped because he had been hit by the charging dog. Physical events around us are not just one damn thing after another. There often appear to be causes and effects, but you cannot see a cause, at least literally. What you can see are events, and your brain interprets that succession as cause plus effect. Interesting. We can't see cause and effect, but we interpret it nevertheless. Okay, third, detecting goal-directed motion. The dog charged across the street in a particular direction that happened to point toward the cat's location. To put things in a more natural way, the dog's goal was to get closer to the cat. If all you saw was the physical motion, you would think that some invisible force was driving the dog toward the cat. But an influence system in your brain suggests that this invisible force is inside the dog's head and in his desire to get closer to something that looks like prey. Now, we have to, for all of us, we have to say the dog is kind of stupid, because if he gets near that cat's going to scratch his nose, and he's really not going to like it. But that's just my own inference. Keeping track of who's who in the scene. The scene makes sense to you as an eyewitness only if you can keep track of different characters and keep a particular file on each of them with an account of what just happened to them or what they just did. This seems, of course, trivially, not a word I've ever used, easy. If some system in your brain takes a snapshot of every character's face and then manages in re-identify the different characters, even though faces and bodies change orientation, they are partly occluded, the lighting is different, etc., etc. Okay, so keeping track. Now, I have to say, in photography, because of digitalization, the photographic companies have come up with algorithms that identify faces, and they even identify smiles and eye. If you're doing an autofocus thing and you want the eyes in focus, you can focus on the eyes itself. Well, that is in there somehow. Okay, linking structure to function. The screwdriver hurt the man as he fell down. This is not too surprising, as the instrument was probably hard, pointed, and the blade at the end was probably sharp. We intuitively guess all this, not just because the screwdrivers in general are like that, but also because there is a reason for these features. They help in performing particular functions. That we expect tools to have such functional features is manifest in the surprise that would be created if the crowbar or the screwdriver happened to be soft as rubber. So we just know that it's hard, and it's probably sharp enough to create damage. And finally, understanding mental representation. This too is indispensable if we are to make sense of what happened to the thief and the police officer. To us witnesses of what happened, she saw that the man had dropped his hat and wanted to give it back to him. He thought she knew he had broken into the house, but she in fact did not know that, although she immediately deduced what was going on when she saw the jewels. She also realized the thief had not understood that she only wanted to help him. One could go on for some time. The point is that you cannot understand the story if you cannot maintain a rather sophisticated account of who thinks what about whom. But the thoughts are invisible. You cannot observe them directly. You have to infer them. This is by far not a complete list of what happened or was engaged. All of this is called by psychologists intuitive physics. And intuitive physics uses observable phenomenon like motion of objects to infer what is intrinsically invisible. Cause and effect. It's invisible, but we deduce it through our automatic sort of inference. That we have precise expectations is not something that we are aware of. We're not doing that consciously. It's all happening behind the scenes. But we are conscious of what that means. We begin to realize why there's a sardonic smile on the cop's face when she realizes that he is a robber, not only a person to be helped to get his hat. Well, the point of this is all that Boyer is just telling us that the mind is pretty complicated and that there are lots of little systems in it, inference systems, that create for us a sense of what's going on, reality. And more of that tomorrow. We're in chapter 3, and the beginning of it is the mind is complicated, and it's doing all kinds of things for us, and it has all these little structures in it that are coming through with something that makes a coherent narrative, not necessarily an enjoyable one, but a coherent narrative. Anyway, well, so much for today.